Welcome to the Academy of Esports podcast. I'm your host, James O'Hagan. Today I am talking with Zack Gilbert. He is the Ed Gamer, if you will, on Twitter. And Zack is also a teacher at the Thomas Metcalf Laboratory School in Normal, Illinois. Is it Illinois State at Normal or is it Bloomington?
No, it's not Bloomington. It's
Normal.
Normal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Illinois State University.
Yes.
In Normal.
In
Yes.
Normal. Yes. Well, Zack, thank you so much for being on the Academy of Esports podcast. And for those of you who may not know who Zack is quite just yet, Zack is probably the if I called some people the godfather of esports, Zack is kind of like I guess you could say the Abraham of gaming in schools. I met Zack about 10 years ago. Not directly, but indirectly, because Zack was running a podcast around games and education. So Zack, thanks so much for being on the Academy of Esports podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's kind of weird. Godfather. Yeah. So when I think of people that are pioneers of games and learning, playful learning, whatever you want to call it, Dr. James Paul G is probably, if I'm the godfather, he's probably Moses. He's brought the tablets down. So yeah, there's been a lot of people that have been involved in games and learning, which now it's turned into esports because it's another avenue for using games for learning.
But it's important to have the distinction too that when you were talking about using games in your school, you were actually tying it to curriculum, but you also had casual game players. And again, now that we have esports, now it's taken it to a competitive level.
Yeah, so it's using games in the classroom has always been big with me. It's kind of personal. I enjoy doing it, so it's kind of one of those things that if I enjoy the way I look at it, if I enjoy what I'm doing in the classroom, then I have a better chance of the students enjoying what they're doing as well. And I think that's really important. Teachers really need to start thinking about that because I think many teachers teach things that they're not very passionate about, and then the kids are not passionate about it. They go together. So yeah, using games in the classroom, having game clubs, after school game clubs for recreation, and then several years back, students were saying, Mr. Gilbert, you got to try this League of Legends game. And you got to see what this is all about. And so they hounded me. I finally played and then realized after playing for a couple weeks that I needed to stop because if I kept playing, it would totally consume my time, my free time, which was very small anyway, of playing that game. It is such a complicated game, but it got me into the world of esports. And now I think some of the people I know at NASEF, and I had other names for it, but I'm looking at esports as a Trojan horse for games and learning, using games in the classroom to teach.
Now let's back up before we get too deep into the esports side. I mean, you and I are of a similar generation. We probably played Oregon Trail, and the joke with Oregon Trail is, when you go to buy your supplies, it's like I need an oxen and I need my cart and then just whatever bullets I can buy with the rest of my money. And nobody ever wanted to be the carpenter. Everybody wanted to be the banker until you had to get across the river. That's probably a game I know for me personally that was kind of an inspirational piece in schools and taught me quite a bit about. Actually did teach me a bit about the travels west and how long it took. Were there any games growing up for you that were kind of like that game that like an Oregon Trail?
Well, we had the Oregon Trail. There was also this elections game, which I need to write it down somewhere. It was basically, it was on these old computers that we had in our middle school, and you would make some choices about your topics or things that you are really wanting to promote, whether it's the environment or education or whatever, military, and you make these decisions and you'd go through the election process and it would actually tabulate if you would actually win to become president of the United States. So I remember that one vividly, but I also remember walking to the bowling alley every Saturday morning when I was in junior high and just putting tons of quarters into video games. So in the arcade. So Super Mario Brothers, any of those games, Dungeons and Dragons was probably another big one. So, not necessarily in school, but I didn't start making the connection to games until I started teaching, and then I started integrating simulations and other things that would be interesting to the kids because I enjoyed listening to teachers tell stories about history, but most of the other students in the classroom did not. And
Hmm.
so that thinking about that, and then listening to hearing my students, I could tell some great stories, but I also figured out after assessing them that they didn't necessarily remember everything that I was telling them. And that's when I thought, okay, maybe we need to learn by doing. And so then I started creating some simulations where the kids would act out and be part of some type of historical simulation, whether it was creating a government, almost like a Lord of the Flies type of thing, or having a court case or whatever it was. It was they were involved, and they'd start researching and getting into it. And then all of a sudden, it was about 2005 or so, Civilization 4 came out. I was playing the game with my friends, and all of a sudden it hit me. It was just like, everything I'm doing in this game,
Hmm.
I do in my ancient civilizations classroom.
Hmm.
I need to do something with it. So that was actually my master's project, was connecting the standards to Civilization 4, and then starting to figure out lessons and ways to integrate that into my classroom. And I had great support from administrators and such, but that's what became my project, and it all expanded from there. So now not only am I using digital games, but I'm also using tabletop games. So Settlers of Catan is a great supply and demand game. And we just had game club last Friday. We just have a new professor at Illinois State University that's teaching game design, tabletop game design, and digital game design. We didn't know, he just started like I said, last semester. We didn't know about each other until like a few days ago. He comes to my game club, and we are geeking out, and he's seeing all the potential of connecting with me in my classroom and what I'm doing, whether it was for game design. So now it's one of those things. Playing games is great, but think of all the advantages and learning that can happen by creating games to teach others. So when you start having kids teaching other kids certain concepts through creating a game, oh my
Hmm.
goodness, my mind starts exploding about what the potential could be there. So every time I play a game, I always look at it as an educational, with an educational angle. And that's, when I do presentations, I did a presentation on Friday, and one of the first screens that pops up is Grand Theft Auto,
Hmm.
and I go, hey, let's look at some games that can teach some things. And Grand Theft Auto pops up, and the teachers in there are just like, what the heck is going on? I go, now, doesn't mean that we should use games like this in the classroom, but there are things that you can learn in this game, and whether it's good or bad.
Hmm.
And the math, the economics, the social divisions within communities. I mean, you can go on and on and on about what that game could actually teach. Now, I would never use it in a classroom, but that's what I'm getting at, is that any game can teach.
Well, maybe even a game like Red Dead Redemption, same publisher, Red Dead Redemption, which takes place in the Old West. You can play the storyline, obviously, but one of the things that I love doing is in the game is actually going out on just to roam around, and one of the things that it has you do is search out different animals, and as soon as you find the animals, you mark it in a book. As soon as you find certain plants, you can collect those plants and begin to make medicines like they would in the Old West. So there's even though the game has a very rich storyline, there's a lot of open play as well too that kind of lets you explore that environment that they're in, see the environments that some of these animals lived in, see how they interacted, how you actually hunted back in that time, tried to track animals and things like that.
How accurate is it?
I think that I think Rockstar, after spending several years just focusing on the same, because they only put out like one game, every
Yeah.
few years. I find that just the animal tracking feature alone, and just being able to go around and just search out all these animals, I think they've done an excellent job of creating a
So
very realistic world.
yeah, it'd be interesting to see, and just even just researching, having kids research and see if, I mean, you would not use the game. You maybe in high school,
Hmm.
later in high school, because Assassin's Creed's been used in high schools, and so
Yeah.
Ubisoft has spent millions of dollars researching and putting time in the historical accuracy of whether you're in Boston or in Alexandria in Egypt. And they even have a educational walkthrough. You're not killing anybody. You're just
Hmm.
walking through and seeing it. And of course, Notre Dame, the cathedral, has actually gone to Ubisoft and contacted them because they have the most accurate recreation of what Notre Dame looks like because it's in their game. They spent
Yeah.
a ton of time in there remapping and rebuilding the entire cathedral, and so now it's being used for architectural purposes and historical preservation.
And and that is absolutely correct. As I mean, we need to be a little bit more explicit about what they did. I mean, they scanned the building down to the bricks.
Yes.
It wasn't just they went in and went, okay, here's this
Oh,
wall.
yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no, they got it down to the bricks.
Yeah, and that was it was a passion, a love that they had for what they were doing, and so especially when they're rebuilding these cities and such, yeah, there's a love there. They've also done they did a game called Valiant Hearts, which was taking stories, letters written from a World War I veteran, and then actually turning that into a game, and it's a heart wrencher. But it's an accurate story about what a narrative about what happened during World War I, and it comes from different perspectives: a German soldier, a British soldier, a nurse, and then actually following a dog in the game. So they really have the educational piece at mind when they are putting that together. But they also know that in order to sell a game, they do have to make it. There has to be some type of entertainment, which is,
Mm-hmm.
the balance between and the frustration of those that want to use games for learning is that somebody that goes out and tries to make an educational game, the profit margin on something like that is not very good. You're not going to get a ton of money from schools, but there are games out there that can balance both sides and still be entertaining and make money and also be used for educational purposes. And it's usually educators like myself, and I'm guessing if you were teaching, nowadays, that you'd probably see some of those things as well, is that you're playing the game and you're going, oh my goodness, I could use this game for this, this, and this.
Yeah, I look around and I look at, like, for example, you're talking about board games. I look at board games like Axis and Allies, which I've been playing since college to try to really understand World War II. I look at a game like SimCity today,
Oh yeah.
which is, even at its basic core level, if you just use the old original SimCity, which I think you can probably play in a Flash version. I mean,
Yeah.
just understanding the taxes between industrial, commercial, and residential, and how that impacts everything. If you really want to get down to like some really detailed city building, you look at a game like Cities Skylines, which
Yep.
if you don't have a good enough quality computer, will melt down most computers because it is so accurate down to the very person
Yeah.
in a town. But yeah, I could see right now, if I was a teacher in a classroom, especially elementary level, just how important game and gameplay has become, or we are realizing it is becoming, I guess I could say.
Yeah, and it's, we, like you said, we grew up in this time period that we started playing these games. Atari, and then Nintendo, Commodore 64, all those early gaming consoles that came out, and we'd play those, and I started getting into computer games. It's just one of those things that it just starts stretching further and further. Another little story to share you. So I've been playing Civilization 4 in my classroom for the last week, off and on for the last week and a half. And I had a parent I saw last night, and he's like, "You got my kid hooked. He comes home, he's just blah, 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 blah. He's just talking about the game. He goes, I have no idea what he's talking about, but he's excited about it." And I go, "Well, I got another one for you." I said, I think I could probably show him that there's ways to modify, because the game's actually written in Python. You can actually make modifications and make scenarios by learning Python and writing your own code and putting that in there, and then making your own game, basically own mod, and then having other people play it. I said, I've probably had about a half dozen students in the past that have done that, and guess what they've gone on to do? They've become coders, and they're doing quite well. So it's a passion, but it's that intrinsic motivation. Now, I have kids in every class that they're not this game is too difficult for them, and so you've got to make sure that you have something else for them. So
That's a
for the
very good
most part,
point.
for the most part, when I first started using this game, if I sat down and played the game, the kids wouldn't want to watch me play. But I think, and this could be a segue, I think the esports era of watching games, people play games.
Hmm.
I've had more and more kids. So I've got these kids that didn't get into the game, but they're willing to sit down and watch me play and then help describe what's going on. And they would take notes on it and start, asking questions and building up the ideas that I'm trying to teach and the standards that I'm trying to teach by watching me play. So there are other avenues there, but normally for games that I use in the classroom, we usually play it once, and then if I offer it up again, it's done as a choice. Do you want to use this? Minecraft is probably, out of all of these, I mean, Civilization is very, specific
Hmm.
on what it does. Although it does a lot of things, it's just very difficult. Minecraft, on the other hand, is so open-ended, and basically anything you can imagine, you can build. Anything you want to teach, you can put, the kids can use in Minecraft. And so for that one, you get a lot of kids. If I have a kid that's not very good at building, if I got out Legos, they're able to, okay, I can do this. I can,
Hmm.
because they will actually want to hold it in their hands. They might be better at doing that than actually clicking and moving around. Some kids just have a difficulty with that, and that's okay. You still want to have that playful environment to where, okay, you don't want to do this, but we still need to build. What, throwing it to the kids, what are you wanting to, what other tools could you use? And like I said, it all started way back when I started using Minecraft, and kids were like, do you have Legos? I'm like, sure. So that's when I started bringing that in. It's just finding those opportunities to learn, but create it in a fun and engaging way. I think we're approximately the same age. Um,
I'm
the
44.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit older. You're a
Oh,
youngin. So
oh, I thought for sure I was older than you. Wow.
uh,
Okay.
no, your gray is probably if I grew that out, I'd get some pepper. But
All right.
it's genes. My dad had dark hair into his late 70s, so which is great.
Yeah.
Your dad. Where was I going? The Using Minecraft. Oh, boogers. See, you got me off
Oh,
thinking about my dad.
yeah. Sorry. So we're about the same age.
Oh,
You were talking about that.
and when I first started teaching, thank you. When I first
Yes.
started teaching, basically everything, the way I was taught to teach is that I would create as a teacher. I'd create everything and basically spoon feed it to the kids, right? And
Yep.
they
That
would just
sounds very
regurgitate.
familiar.
They would regurgitate it back. Well, one of my
Hmm.
first mentors, within the first years of teaching, which is the mid to late 90s, he said, you know what, you can plan and put things together, but the kids should be the ones tired at the end of the day. They're the ones that should be actively working and thinking and engaging and doing. And that has kind of stuck with me. And he was way ahead of the curve when he would do that, because now that's common speak, right? That,
Hmm.
we really need, instead of me creating something, okay, here's a problem, and class, you need to solve this, right? Here's the problem. This is our goal. This is what we want it to look like. Kind of the what the project, what it should look like at the end, and then how you get there. That's up to you, and I can guide and help you along.
But Zach, again, you've been doing this for several years. You've got carte blanche. When you first got this started, when you first said, you know what, I want to bring in certain games into my classroom, especially a game like Civ 4, where,
Oh,
I'm sure the IT department's like, you want to bring in what, and you want to install what, where.
yeah.
How did you, because again, we're coming also from the age of, in the last 20 years, we've had No Child Left Behind, where play was really pushed aside. And if it didn't fit into the state assessments or whatever, typically that thing would be like, well, we're not going to do that because that's just a waste of time. How did you approach, because there may be people here who are thinking about, yeah, I would really love to bring in some of these games, but I don't know how to approach the conversation. How did you start to approach the conversation as being one of the first people to really do this in the classroom?
Well, I think I was lucky, and that's usually what it boils down to. I teach a subject that's most often not tested. So I teach social studies.
Hmm.
So for me, it's not in the state of Illinois. It's not. I think it used to be years ago. Used to be tested. It's
Hmm.
not tested anymore. Even though for me, social studies is what binds everything together. It gives meaning to all the other subject areas. As we look at the past, because everything now is, everything is in the past. The literature, science, math, all of that is part of social studies. I try to bring it all together. So
It's a
I
lot of
feel it's
why.
important.
It's a lot of
It
why.
is.
Yeah.
Well, it's giving meaning to it's great. Okay, you split the atom. Wonderful.
Hmm.
Now what are you going to do with it? right? And so making those decisions, you need to have some type of social studies mindset to know and think about the implications of it, and whether it was used for energy purposes or destruction. And that was the conflict at the time, especially between the scientists and the politicians and the military, is that, what do you do with it? That's what social studies mindset really when it comes into play. So I wasn't assessed. I had supportive IT, I had supportive administration.
Hmm.
Since I did my master's project on game-based learning, I got, signed off on it. And then when I started bringing in the research into it and showing, hey, this is beneficial. And I always opened up my classroom. I said, if you want to, any parent, any administrator, you want to come into my classroom and see this in action, please come in. I want you to see it, because I want you to see what's going on. And every time I have a teacher, or we have guests, because teaching at the laboratory school at Illinois State University, I have a lot of observers that come in,
Hmm.
of future teachers, and they see this happening and their eyes light up. They're like, oh my goodness, you're doing this? I'm like, yes. And you see the reaction of all the kids, and so that's making an impression on those future teachers. But so all of it's kind of come around to where, yes, I have that. I have the carte blanche that I can go in and do this, and I have the experience to do this. And I tell people, especially civilization, that's not something that any teacher can do. You really need to know the game. It is very complicated.
Hmm.
Um, but going back to what I was talking about before, giving the students some responsibility, some onus on what's going on. You could be a teacher that doesn't know the game. You have access to a few computers. Have students test it out after school,
Hmm.
and see what it's like. And that's why I started the game club, was to test out games. It really was a test platform for using games in the classroom of, will this game work or this game not work? And if it did, then those students that were a game club would go back and teach it to the kids that were in the classroom. So I'd actually put the responsibility on the kids to teach the games. And that's how I've done Catan, is that I'd teach it in game club, and then I'd have
Hmm.
those group of kids come in and teach it to the kids that are in my regular classroom. So it took a lot of effort. It took a lot of work. But nowadays, there's so much research done on game-based learning that it shouldn't be hard to integrate. The only problem, and I think you see this in the state you're in and administration wise, and you've talked to people all over the country, that you've got some that they basically are given a binder. They're told what to teach, when to teach, how to
Yep.
assess, when to assess, and your evaluations based on that assessment. That I don't know. I don't know what to do in those situations, because I tell you what, if I was ever put in that situation, I don't think I'd be teaching. So I feel for those. I feel for those people, but there's got to be a way to present the idea of game-based learning, and bring it to the classroom. There's Brain Pop does a great job, right? They use games to enhance and reinforce ideas that are taught.
And short
iCivics is
videos. Yeah.
short videos, little gameplay. iCivics does a phenomenal job teaching civics education, and
And that's
theirs is
Constant
all,
Steinkuhler at UC Irvine, who I think
yeah.
developed that game, and Kurt
She,
Squire.
along with, yep, and then I'm thinking James Paul G.
Hmm.
So and that's Sandra Day O'Connor. That was kind of an initiative she wanted. She wanted to have civics education taught. So all there's ways to do it, and that's, like I said, that's for social studies. There's a lot of science groups out there that put out some games. There's ways to integrate playful learning in some way, shape, or form, and it doesn't have to happen overnight. Your whole curriculum doesn't have to be game based. It's when it fits in. It's taken me years to get to the point where every unit that I teach, I have some type of game that's associated with it. There's a way to have the kids experience and do and
Hmm.
learn by doing, and it just works for me. But if it's not your cup of tea, then that's the other part of it too, is that if you do something you don't want to do, then that goes off poorly with your students. And that's so. But I think all of us, in some way, shape, or form, we all enjoy games. And when I ask that, there's people, when I do presentations, how many of you play games? And you maybe have half or even less than that. I go, bull. That's
Exactly. Right.
you don't. Okay, what you're
Everybody
thinking
take
of.
out your phones. I want to
Yes.
take a look
Yep.
at your apps
Yep.
on your phones.
Candy Crush, whatever it is. I mean, so they have all those little games. And how many of you have, I mean, and then you get into gamification, which is it's adding a game layer to something else, which is there's good and bad to that. But if you have any card that has points, or if you have an app, Starbucks, and you gain points, all these companies that are adding a point reward system into what they're doing, that's all gamification. They're
Yeah.
spending billions of dollars researching and putting that in there.
And I think it's important to note too, because I talk a lot about self-determination theory on the podcast and talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. You're still talking about taking social studies, a subject that a lot of kids, if they had their choice of things to do in school, aren't necessarily, if minus your games and everything else. Let's just say there was all the subjects laid out. That's not going to be a subject that kids are necessarily attracted to right away, just by itself on the surface. But what you're still doing is you're saying gamification, you're still putting extrinsic motivations to get kids to engage in the curriculum. They're not necessarily intrinsically motivated right away.
Right. And there's good
And there's
bad
not
to
all
that.
kids who are, and there's not all kids who are going to resonate. Each game's not going to resonate with every kid. And you were talking about earlier about having alternatives as well, which I think is important to reinforce here.
It is, and you have to know your students in order to be able to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that takes time. And there's some danger there, because the carrot and stick is not necessarily the best way. It's got to be. I think Matthew Farber talks about this. It talks about it's got to be a seamless integration. It just can't be something that's and I don't know who said it, chocolate covered broccoli, right? There's that Math Blaster, right? You Math Blaster game where you shoot, you have a problem, it's 2 + 2, and you're looking for the asteroid with a 4, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a chocolate covered broccoli. And to a certain extent, that kind of works. I mean, and there's some good and bad to that. But dangling it out, and what I don't like to see is teachers using games as a reward.
Oh yeah.
Right. I know teachers have a good heart into the reason why they want to use that. You get this done, you get to play this game. No, the game should be looked upon as another tool, just like a tablet or a pencil and paper. It's another tool that you can use in order to extend your learning. So one of the tools that I do use that is kind of is a gamification tool, but I try to the best I can seamlessly integrate, is Classcraft, which is basically a role-playing game for the classroom. And each kid has a character class, mage, warrior, healer, and they earn experience points. They can get hit points for doing things that are not part of the expectations, or they gain experience points by doing good things in the classroom. They can gain gold as well. Parents, it's like a class dojo, if you know Class Dojo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It's
the
like
behavior. It's like behavior, right?
Yeah, it's able to track behavior. And there's, like I said, when it's used improperly, it's well, any tool really, when it's used improperly, it's bad. And Classcraft is kind of like Class Dojo on steroids. It's just a whole nother level. But it integrates little things like random events. I could good and bad things happen. But failure and bad things happen in life, right? So
Mm-hmm.
in these random events, it could be a storm is hit, or if we're studying ancient Egypt, it's like the pharaoh's upset with you. You've lost 10 hit points, or whatever it is. And then the other part of it too is that they have collaborative powers. So the kids, there's mages, warriors, and healers. So healers heal, warriors protect, and mages are able to give what's called action points, mana, blue
Mm-hmm.
points, which anybody watching esports podcast should know mana, right? So in some way, shape, or form. So
It's not just bread from heaven.
it's not it's not just bread for exactly. So the mage is the one that's able to give the action points to the other two, and you use action points by protecting or healing. So they have to work together. When something bad happens in the class and people lose hit points, the kids have to work together in order to problem solve, to figure out how they're going to raise everybody up, and they need to work together in that atmosphere. And it's not forced, because they really want to do it, but it's like I said, random things happen. And it could just be adding a roll of the dice We got a disagreement between two kids, and then I pull out a 20-sided dice, and they're like, "What is that?" It's a 20-sided, so it's 20-sided, and they roll it, and then okay, problem solved. Rock paper scissors. It's just adding those little playful elements into the classroom that if teachers, and I hear this, I don't hear it as much as I used to. I tell teachers, you need to have fun in the classroom. They're like, you can't have fun. We need to learn. I'm like, oh my goodness.
Who says that?
It's scary, isn't it? But I
Yeah.
think some people are so ingrained in the environment that they're in that they have a difficult time because they're forced in what they have to teach. They don't have the professional. They're not given that professionalism in order to do the things they want to do, and it gets very sad.
I used to stand up in front of my class and I could tell right away when things weren't working out, and I would look at them and go, look, this is the material I got for today. If this isn't working for you, please, somebody's got to let me know that they're just bored to tears, because if you're bored, I'm bored. So the people who say we shouldn't have fun in class, or why should we have fun in class, I can't see eye to eye with them. And I can tell you this too, everybody who's listening or watching, Zack has thrown out a lot of stuff. A lot of games and things.
ADHD, I'm sorry.
No, but what I'm going to do is make sure is that there's links in the show notes, if you look at the podcast description, or if you're looking at this wherever, YouTube, there will be links to a lot of things. I'm glad to.
Notes, aren't you?
Yes, I'm all mental notes, but I'm gonna have to rewatch this so I can make sure I get everything else down.
Yeah. If you need links and stuff, let me know, because the other another Michael Matera, who has
he's right up here at the University School in Milwaukee.
Oh, is he?
Yes.
Oh, very cool. So he has Explorer like a pirate, right? Which is the XP. So he does I think his book is probably the best for onboarding those that are wanting to bring a playful environment into their classroom. So he can take traditional teaching methods and start showing you how to turn those into playful experiences. And that is, I think, for a lot of teachers, that is a great way, is a great first step for many teachers.
Now this is a perfect segue into the next half of our conversation, because I want to say it was 2 summers ago when they did have their conference up at the University School, and Michael and I were talking, as I did a small session. I did a session on esports, and I think I had like 5 people in the room, because again, who knew, go back 2 or 3 summers ago, nobody knew what esports was still, at least in the education level. And Mike said to me, well, this is just gamification. And I'm like, not at all. Actually, we're taking things from the other end when we're talking about esports. So, you've been talking about things in your classroom that have come from the extrinsic side of motivating kids to understand content information. What we're saying now is, through esports, is now we have the intrinsic side where kids are already playing video games, the games that they're playing, the experiences they're wanting. And now we're starting to come around the other side and trying to get at kids' intrinsic motivations and trying to, again, feed them the hopes and dreams of what we want them to learn and how we would like them to act online through esports. What's been your transition to esports, coming from the extrinsic side, from looking at things from like, how do I take this material for my class and make it really engaging, versus now coming around the other end?
It started with the kids, right? Because the kids were the ones that we had game club, and they were just like, hey, can we start playing some of these games and start competing?
And these are middle schoolers, right?
These are middle schoolers. Yep. So that's when it started for me to get into it. Now, as I mentioned before, esports is like the Trojan horse for playful learning. And I guess the biggest motivator for its growth, I think people enjoy it, but to get support of businesses and companies to get involved in esports, it's the money. The growth of esports has just been phenomenal, and there's a lot of companies that are making money on this. So that's one of the motivating factors. There's also it's the new jobs that are going to be created by esports. We got a new director, David Kirk. He's our director of esports here at Illinois State University. It's our first big step towards getting esports, a foundation to build and grow.
Mm-hmm.
And so, um, and then I've been trying to help. I've been helping Illinois State University, and there's many others that are doing this as well. That we're starting to make the connections to other parts of the university campus. So
Right.
when we look at esports, we're like, State Farm is headquarters in Bloomington, Illinois, Bloomington Normal here. So State Farm has been involved in advertising for
And for those who,
esports.
if you didn't catch that, State Farm, it wasn't just, it's not some local, it can't mean the regular State Farm. Yes, Zach means the actual big insurance company, State Farm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The headquarters started in Bloomington. It's in Bloomington, Illinois. And what's interesting is that the one of the heads of marketing for State Farm, I've gotten to know because his kids have actually gone through my school, so which is kind of handy. So we've had conversations over the last few years about esports. Well, I think I can confidently say that without this person, State Farm would not be involved in esports at all. He was the one that got the ball rolling and really pushing and showing and showing the numbers that this is happening, and we need to get involved in it. So you've got a business avenue, right? You've got the business avenue to esports. You have our esports is going to be housed within the recreational services, right? So we are looking at doing diet.
And this is at the collegiate level.
This is a collegiate level,
Yeah.
but what I'm loving is that David Kirk is working with us and the schools in our area. That my hope is, and his hope is too, is that it kind of trickles down. That if the things that they're doing at Illinois State, and also we've got a wonderful coach, Callum Fletcher at Illinois Wesleyan, which is a top esports.
Oh, they're
program in the
fantastic.
country. And so we got two great guys here in Bloomington Normal, which is wonderful. So hopefully all this will trickle down to the high school and then also the middle school. But eating well, sleeping well, exercising, and then you got the business, and then you've got computer science. And NASEF has that wonderful graphic.
Oh yeah, the ecosystem.
The ecosystem where you start looking at casters and creators and artists. And I had a call the other day with an attorney, a lawyer, that where more lawyers are now trying to specialize in esports for contracts. So you've got all these different avenues, and so getting the colleges on campus to see that. Of course, me for the College of Education, I'm definitely on board with it as well. So all of those pieces, getting the real world implications of what esports is. Now you start getting high school guidance counselors excited, because now you've got the real world implications, but now they're starting to get scholarships to go play for these schools.
Let's highlight that point really quickly. That is something that I know I have struggled with is getting, we know that there's projected $100 million in scholarship opportunities by 2023. And yet it feels like there's all these scholarships out there and nobody knows where they're at and nobody knows how to get them and nobody knows how to talk to anybody about how to make those happen. It's a very odd thing right now where.
So you played college athletics, were you?
Well, I played rugby. And I was in the marching band.
You did, but it was kind of marginal. So I know with the NCAA, there's clearinghouse. There's a process.
Yes.
If you are looking to become a college athlete, there's a whole process for that. So I don't, because esports is not part of the NCAA.
Right.
I'm guessing that might be part of the problem. And you're starting to see all these companies pop up that they want to help find scholarships for kids.
There are.
It is. You talked about Red Dead Redemption. It is kind of the Wild West. And I just put a message out on Facebook to my cousin and some of the parents that were on that post, that talking about how you've got to be very cautious, because there's a lot of companies out there that are trying to sell things. They look like they have good intentions, but I'm not 100% confident in what they're doing. So I don't know where to send them on, but I'm hoping that some of these universities are connecting with our guidance counselors in the high schools, and then working through there, and then also working with the high school coaches as well.
There's been one of the things I saw recently when I was down at TCEA in Austin this past week was a really interesting idea, and this might be a model that may work for you even. In that I met a group of kids. I call them kids, they're college students. Two young ladies came up to me and introduced themselves as members of the El Paso Honey Badgers. And I was like, okay, this is a pro team. And actually, it's not a pro team. They're a team that is based out of the University of Texas, El Paso. Mm-hmm. However, they're not officially affiliated as the UTEP esports team. But the concept that they came up with, and it's a really interesting concept, and I'm going to explore it on a future podcast with them, is it kind of set up as the European club model. So they have El Paso Honey Badger middle schoolers, high schoolers, and they want to have this kind of linear pipeline, if you will, to develop alumni and mentorship along the way between all the different levels. So as kids move through as middle schoolers, they move right into the high school age team, and then they can move on to the collegiate team and again make those college connections at an early age.
Is that a connection from the university down to the high school, down to the middle school?
They're operating more like a club, almost like a private club.
Okay.
But it still is an interesting way to consider how do we set up, especially with you being already at Illinois State, what's keeping you all from, sorry, I was in Texas for a week, a few days.
Where's your hat? Okay. And boots.
What is keeping Illinois State from saying, you know what, with the lab school at least, let's set up a model that's kind of like that, where our kids, our college age kids maybe are interacting or working with high school age, and high school are working with middle school. And again, it creates that, I guess, that pipeline, if you will, from if they don't end up at college, at least there's the college connections already being made at an early age.
And so David Kirk, who came from Akron, and there was a laboratory school as well, that he did some camps, but he also he makes it as part of, as he gets started next fall with his team. Part of the requirements of being on the varsity team is that you're getting involved and helping and volunteering at local high schools and middle schools. So that is part of what he wants to do, because that's what worked out well for him in Akron. His players would go and help out because those schools we need volunteers. I mean, I know we've talked about managers, right? Esports managers. Mm-hmm. I don't know the games that the kids are playing. I don't know them well enough to coach them. Yep. And so and what we're seeing, and this is a whole nother topic too, is that many universities and high schools are thinking, I'll just hire one esports coach and that'll be good enough. We have 4 games, and it's like hiring, you have one, okay, then your track team only needs one coach. They're like, no, that doesn't make sense. I'm like, exactly, it's the same thing. So yes, going back to what you're talking about is that from we are already working on that. He did it in Akron. I'm wanting it to happen here. And for me, I see myself not being as involved in the high school area as I am in the middle school. And the whole purpose of that is that, I think we talked about this when we were at the 66 Games Expo and tournament a few weeks back, is that I think it all starts with the middle school. If we are going to work on all the issues that esports have with toxicity and equality and treating others with respect and collaboration and gender, making sure we have enough diversity in that area, then I think it starts in middle school, because it's going to make it easier for the transition from middle school to high school. If you don't have anything in the middle school and you go off to high school and you're thinking, oh, I'll get involved there, your numbers are going to be reduced, especially as I'm talking as a father of 2 daughters, is that my one daughter won't be involved at all because of certain pressures that are happening within and dynamics within a high school. But if she came from a middle school and was in a program and then was able to move up, then it would feel the continuity would be there, and there wouldn't be as much pressure because there's already other girls that are involved and there's other people, and these people that are involved in the middle school program are good kids. And if they weren't, then they're not going to be part of the program. They have to learn and have that model behavior and to be taught that, because they're kids.
Yeah.
Adults have a huge problem with behaving appropriately in esports. So, the younger we start with it, the better off they're going to be.
And it's important also to say too that it's not just girls. I mean, I've come across all kids who have come back to gaming sophomore, junior year of high school, finding out that there was a team and said, yeah, I used to game when I was in middle school and I
Oh,
got picked on or bullied so much I just quit. Yeah.
yeah. See,
And here's the other thing too
yeah,
with all this is we're talking
it's so
about
frustrating.
recruiting because middle school is so hard for kids. It's hard for some teachers too. Middle school is. I taught fifth graders when I was in the classroom, and I did work as a tech integration specialist for a few years in a 6, 7, 8 building, and I know what that middle school. As soon as my fifth graders were aged out and going down the hall to the sixth, seventh, and eighth grade wing, I'd say please don't come back until the end of eighth grade.
Yeah, yeah,
That kind of thing. But you talked about earlier about the counselors and how the counselors need to be educated. There's social workers who are also
yeah.
working with the kids who absolutely need this opportunity the
Yep.
most, who need this connection to a positive adult interaction, who need this opportunity to play because, some of the feedback I get from some of my own scholar gamers is that, this is the one time of day between school and home that they feel relevant, that they
Yeah.
feel connected to other kids, that they have fun, which is sad to say.
Yeah, that is one of the main reasons why I started game clubs in the first place. It gave, and it's always been my mantra, is that it gives kids a safe place to play,
Hmm.
right? And so the guidance counselors at the middle school, when kids were struggling, they're like, hey, is there any groups that you can be involved in? And no, their kids are like, no. They go, have you gone to game club? And the kid perks, game club? There's game
Hmm.
club? And so that opens that up. So, and that was another area that I forgot to mention that I have a feeling because I've gotten to know our school psychologist quite well in helping out students, and I think she uses games. I went into her office and I'm seeing all these tabletop games, and they're like, "You're using games." She goes, "Yeah, it's a great way to get kids to open up." I'm like, "Yeah, duh. I mean, that makes sense." So so I could see working with the psychology students and staff at Illinois State and others that they're involved in putting this together as well, because I've helped a lot of kids over the years try to behave appropriately while playing games. And just the other game club on Friday, I had a kid. We always play tabletop games for the first half of the club meeting. I want them sitting down, interacting face to face with each other, and then we started digital after that. Well, this one kid was in the middle of a tabletop game, and
Hmm.
he got up and left so he could go play the digital games. I go, dude, no, that's not happening. That is rude. I go, I
Hmm.
know you don't mean it to be, but that's how others will interpret it, and I don't think you want that to happen. I go, so you need to go back to the game. You need to apologize and say, I'm sorry that I left the game, and then realize that you leaving the game could throw the whole game out of whack, and I don't think you want that to happen. So just recognizing that and helping the kids and to do that there's so many examples and ways that can be done in a game club. So that's another avenue as well.
Now, we only have a few more minutes left to get into a whole lot of other things, but one of the things I really want to talk about as kind of an extension of esports, extension of the work that you've been doing, and you alluded to it a little bit earlier, the 66 Gaming Expo and
Yeah,
Tournament,
games.
which
Yeah,
I was able to come down to
yeah.
several weeks
Uh,
ago and
you're
see
the
how
keynote.
I, I,
So
I was the
yeah.
keynote.
Oh, and you had the privilege of
I got
introducing
to,
somebody.
I did get to introduce Billy Mitchell, who could not have been more interested in me, but I was very interested in him,
Yeah.
seeing him talk, and it was a very interesting experience to watch him speak because the man does speak about the history of gaming, his experience in gaming and gaming culture, which was very different in the 80s and 90s, and even
Oh yeah.
his experiences today, because I guess you could say he's kind of like the marked man, oh, here's the
Yeah.
fastest gun in the West and everybody's going to challenge him.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, he could not have been nicer. He could not
Oh,
have
he's great.
been
Yeah.
more open about his experience. He even did some, I think he was going for a perfect Pac-Man or something of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I,
Did he
I
achieve
don't
it?
even. I don't know.
Oh,
I don't. There were so many things going on, and that's so the expo. Yeah. So that Billy Mitchell was just one piece of many pieces that were happening at the expo. So it started a few years back where three or four of us got together and said, "Hey, I think we need to put an esports tournament together." So Matt Hawkins, who's part of the Visitors Bureau and here in Bloomington Normal. Visit BN, Bloomington Normal. He reached out to a friend of mine, Jamie Matthew, who owns the game store, tabletop game store, which he is a huge supporter. If you run game clubs, try to work with your local game stores. That's all I'm saying. It works out great. So Jamie mentioned me, and then we started connecting other people, and it just started out with an idea. And this was the second year that we had it. The first year we had a blizzard during the tournament, and literally, so it wasn't like we had Overwatch with blizzard, entertainment esports joke. So no, it was an actual blizzard. We had like 6 or 8 inches of snow, and we only had like maybe 200 or so people show up. But all the teams showed up, which was
that's great.
amazing. It's a League of Legends tournament. This past year, we turned it into an expo, and so we had like vintage video games and bringing Billy Mitchell. We had a game jam, which was basically students from universities came in. I don't know if you knew that was going on. That was up in the suites within the Grossinger Motors Arena.
I did see that. They were there for 24 hours. They were doing a build-a-thon.
I think it started on Friday night and it ended Sunday night.
Wow. And they were locked up in those rooms, right? They didn't have to leave the arena or anything. They were there all night.
Yep, they were there all night.
Wow.
The pizza and the Mountain Dew and other drinks,
smell.
I guess Monster an hour a day. I did no. They seemed pretty clean. I was impressed. So they were given a task of creating a game and then using the tools they had, and they did that. There was, like I said, we had the League of Legends tournament going on. There was a little Smash event going on. I think we had close to 1,000 people there for the whole weekend, which was great. And it, like I said, in the State Farm was, without State Farm, I don't know if we could have done what we did. So they've been very helpful in supporting esports. And so we put it together, we threw it together, and I think we had 25 collegiate teams. And about 12.
One from my own alma mater, Purdue University, which was a surprise.
Right.
Which was a surprise to the Purdue official who was there.
It was a nice
which
guy.
does speak. I guess that does speak too. Also, when we talk about the collegiate ranks, I mean, there's the Illinois Wesleyans, which is one of the top 20 teams in the country, versus where colleges sometimes are right now, where kids are self-organizing. Even at the high school level, there's teams that are self-organizing. Kids who are just saying, we're going to do this anyway. Yep. It's very game driven, obviously, at that point when, especially when I look at Purdue University and I look at the opportunity that's there, because it is a research university with an amazing engineering department, and thinking of just the possibilities of if they took esports and really just said, hey, let's make this a research based initiative. There's a lot of potential good there in that.
And that's one of the things that trying to make these connections to the different parts of the Illinois State campus is that there is research there. There's money there in order to do that research. I think the Ohio State University.
No, don't even say that. Just say Ohio State.
Well, I got to give it some credit because that's my grandfather graduated from there. So that's
fair enough.
It's a good school. They did. I think they had a several $1 million research grant to study esports and personal health, right, and fitness. So that was just one study. So there's that there's going to be more and more research, and like I said, it all boils down to it's money, because we both know this, and most of the people who are watching this know that the growth of esports itself is the fastest, as far as I know, the fastest growing sport activity, whatever we're going to call it, in the world. And it will be surpassing many of the traditional sports because it is a worldwide fascination, just like one of my favorite sports, which is soccer/football. And so it is amazing to see, but it does boil down to money, which then concerns me as an educator, trying to make sure that my students and the players are not being taken advantage of.
Right. So. And that's another reason why I've advocated that we need to step into this space, because especially when the sweet spot for kids to go pro is that 16, 17, 18-year-old age. For some of them, when they have $30,000 dangled in front of them and an opportunity to go to Los Angeles and play a game that they love, that's very enticing. But when they get to Los Angeles and the $30,000 they find out very quickly is actually a lot less than some other gamers get, or they're expected to grind away for 16 hours a day.
Yeah.
Yeah. It kind of makes your skin crawl. I will say though, with the pro ranks, at least it seems, I just saw I guess a podcast by Cloud9 the other day, talking about how that rise and grind mentality is starting to shift as as the health and wellness components are really starting to come into play with this, even at the pro levels, which is something we can do. But again, we have to be in this space right now. Even with the college scholarship opportunities, it shouldn't be a question anymore if schools are going to do this. It's a matter of when and how they implement.
And it's just growing.
The full-time jobs in the esports industry have doubled in the last year.
Well, yeah. And then David Kirk was telling me that if you looked on Indeed for esports, jobs, coaching and things like that, that I think he said there was about 700 and just openings, and it's just growing more and more and more.
But it's all about I also see a lot of marketing ones, sales ones,
casting.
Not even the.
IT,
I mean, we're talking down like
setup,
everything that's in that that image that comes from UC Irvine. When we talk about the ecosystem, the marketing, the IT support, all those things, and even legal, as we talked about earlier, the lawyers who are trying to figure out how do we be a lawyer in this industry.
Right.
That's
scary.
all there.
What scares me is that there's so many new companies and organizations that are coming out that are saying that you don't understand the space, but we do.
Yes.
And we will take care of things for you. And I think many schools, I think states, I think many are being taken advantage of, and that concerns me greatly. And that's why, because I'm on the advisory committee for the IHSA, which is the Illinois High School Association. It's the governing body for all activities, sanctioned activities for activities and athletics in the state of Illinois for the 800 high schools. And so that is why we've been charged with trying to put this together. So we have administrators, school administrators, and teachers and athletic directors that are part of the coaches that are part of this process and trying to put together the best kind of league and organization terms and conditions for our esports season and state tournament. We're not really trusting others to do that for us.
And it has blown up in the last few weeks. I mean, we saw it when Playversus made their announcement about Fortnite, and the state of Kentucky and the state of Georgia came right back and said, well, wait a second, you email blasted all of our kids. You didn't talk to any of us. And now we're reconsidering even being associated with your organization. It is very important that states really start to not acquiesce their responsibilities in this space to private companies without really understanding what it is they're giving up.
Yeah. Well, and that's where you might not like attorneys and lawyers, but it's one of those things that was one of the conversations I had with this lawyer this past week is the data privacy issues. So you're signing these kids up. What are you actually giving them? What kind of information are you giving them? And so that's just a whole nother can of worms.
And some school districts aren't fine giving. It'll vary school district to school district. If you understand the education industry, based off of whatever local rules that they want to set, they'll vary that data. That data is totally negotiable, school district to school district.
Yeah, and then of course the people making this is what frustrating. It's education as a whole. We're I think the largest corporation in America, yet we're not run by the people in the business. It's people outside of the business that are making there are good school board members, there are good administrators in certain places, but it's one of those things, the decisions, whether it's made from Washington, D.C. or Springfield, Illinois or Madison, Wisconsin, the people making decisions are not the experts in the actual field of education. And so we see those decisions being made as it comes to esports as well. And so that's why I'm very pleased that our governing body, the IHSA, is asking for our assistance within the schools to help put this together. And that's very exciting.
Zach, we probably have enough information to have a whole other I mean, the fact that you had your own podcast on this subject, I think that we have enough for a whole other episode to do, but unfortunately,
we'll do this again.
We will definitely do this again. And I think we'll have a lot more to talk about next time as rapidly as this has changed in the last year. You know, it's going to rapidly change again in the next year. So
I'm hoping depending on when we talk next, that I'm hoping by March that the IHSA will have a decision made on if they will sponsor a state series this next school year. So that would definitely be something to talk about.
Fantastic.
So, okay.
Well, Zack Gilbert, the Ed Gamer on Twitter, you can find him. He's also at the Thomas Metcalf Lab School at Illinois State. Yeah. Did I say that right? Laboratory School. Sorry.
Yeah, laboratory school. Yeah, lab school. It's the same thing.
Yeah. All right. All right, Zack Gilbert, thanks so much for being on the Academy of Esports podcast. That will do it for this week on the Academy of Esports. I've been your host, James O'Hagan. Esports are organized competitive video games allowing schools to redefine their athletic culture, diversify opportunities for student participation, promote good physical and mental health, increase collegiate scholarship pathways, and play games. We can never forget the importance of play. The mission of the Academy of Esports is to support these ideals. The vision of the Academy of Esports is for all students to experience the fun and joy of playing competitive video games. You may follow me on Twitter at Jim O'Hagan. That's at JimOhagan, and through the Academy of Esports account at TAO Esports. It's a great way to get the latest blog posts, podcast episodes, and news coming out of esports and education. And remember, you can continue your engagement by going to www.taoesports.com. You can also connect through Facebook at www.facebook.com/TAOesports. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to our time again next week.